I, 39, was set up with my wife, who was 40, by a mutual friend. The friend in question was her best friend. Well, I knew her because I was good friends with her brother, and her to an extent. Despite being in similar circles, the two of us had never met or even knew of each other. At the time, I was going through a bit of a dry spell when it came to dating, so I decided to accept the blind date because, why not? If it worked out, then great, but if it didn't work out, then so be it. I'd move on with my life, and the woman I was supposed to be going out with would as well. The date went well enough, and we agreed to go on a second date, followed by a third, a fourth, and well, you get the idea. Admittedly, it might have been a bit of a whirlwind romance, because the two of us were considering marriage as early as 6 months in. I know it sounds crazy, but the two of us got along well. We had a lot in common, and never once did I feel forced when having a conversation with her. It always came naturally to us. So, when I decided that I was going to propose about 8 months in, it didn't seem to be a surprise to anyone. My family was a little hesitant at first, and asked me if perhaps this wasn't too rushed, but at the very least, they were supportive of me. The same went for my wife's family. After we got married, we moved into a house my family was nice enough to give us. It had been in the family for a while, so it wasn't like we were rich or anything. Whichever child managed to get married first is whoever got the house. It sounds cruel, but there were no hard feelings when it came to this plan from any of my siblings. The two of us moved into the house and started doing what all newlyweds did, build a life together. About a year after getting married, my wife discovered she was pregnant, and we then added a baby girl to the household. Newborns can add a lot of stress to a relationship, and our daughter did. But we were managing to make it work, just like we were in our whirlwind romance to marriage. When her best friend got married, the two of us started going out on double dates with the two of them. It was nice because my wife and I didn't exactly have a lot of married friends to hang out with. Thinking back, I realized we mostly had single friends, but that happens sometimes when you get married young. A lot of people choose to wait and get married in their 30s. I always got along with my wife's best friend, and her husband was no different. Like us, they seemed like a great fit. They wanted a family, but weren't going to try yet, because the two of them wanted to focus on their careers first. For the first few years of marriage, things seemed great. I don't think I even realized something was off, because my wife was so good at saving face and keeping up the charade. Looking back at it now, I realize that this is the case. The one who pointed it out to me was my wife's best friend. She came to me one day, saying that she noticed her husband being very secretive lately. When she spied on him, she realized that the person he was talking to was none other than her best friend and my wife. It was hard to tell what they were saying most of the time, but she did hear a few inappropriate things come out of her husband's mouth, followed by a giggle from my wife on the other line. I didn't want to deal with it at first, and tried to come up with a bunch of reasons or excuses why she could have heard what she heard. The problem is, I couldn't come up with anything logical to explain what my wife's best friend was telling me. I decided to do a little spying of my own, and came to the same conclusion as my wife's best friend did. We decided to talk to our spouses separately because it was the easiest way. I asked my wife first if she had something to tell me. When she acted confused, I pressed her about having an affair, and then dropped the bomb that I knew who she was having an affair with too. At first, she tried to say that her own best friend was just trying to break up her marriage, and was jealous of what we had. I told her she thought her husband was having an affair with her as well. We both had suspicions and had enough circumstantial evidence, as you will, to make it eventually. My wife admitted that it was the truth. She had been having an affair with her best friend's husband for the past year. I was floored by the confession because I couldn't believe it had been going on for a year, and I had no idea this was the case. I didn't talk to my wife for a week. There was no forgiving her, but I was in a state of shock. Once the shock wore off, I told her we were over. She seemed sad. However, I doubted it was genuine. When I checked in with my wife's best friend, she said she was also going through with a divorce. Her husband seemed almost happy. So, the two of us divorced our cheating spouses and let them be together. I ended up keeping the house in the divorce, as well as primary custody of our daughter. My ex-wife moved in with the ex-husband of her best friend in the same house they used to share. The best friend didn't care because she wanted nothing to do with him and needed a clean break. Even when she moved out of town, the two of us kept in contact with one another. It was safe to say we were becoming good friends. My ex-wife and her had no further contact with each other, which was for the best. I only talked to her about our daughter because I didn't want her in my life any more than she had to be. One might think that because my ex ended up married to her AP and had an instant house, things were great. No, that was not the case at all. She ended up having two more kids with the AP in 3 years. Turns out the best friend not having kids with him was a good idea because the AP did nothing to help with him. To make matters worse for her, he was cheating on her. My daughter only went over there every other weekend. So thankfully he wasn't exposed to that chaos a lot. Besides our daughter, I had no communication with her, but she did try to get me to help me out with her two kids because she knew how good of a father I was to our daughter. These kids were nothing to me. They were hers and her AP's children, so I told her basically that it was her problem and she had to deal with it. Her former best friend thought this was hilarious when I told her. My ex was desperate, but she made her bed and it was time to lie in it. OP, the first thing I have to say is that your ex-wife has some audacity to turn around and ask you to help with her two younger children. They might be your daughter's younger siblings, but they are nothing to you. Not to be cruel or anything, it's just the fact of the matter. She thought the two of them were going to live happily ever after when little did she know that she could have had a happy ending with you. Just keep parenting your daughter to the best of your ability and being there for her. Trust me when I say that she will appreciate it more than you can know. Your ex-wife is just going to have to deal with having two kids with a deadbeat who won't help and cheats on her. Her former best friend dodged a bullet by not having kids with the guy. If she had, I bet dollars to donuts she would have ended up in the same situation as your ex, and obviously that's not a great situation to be in. Now let's get into our next story for today. I 50 male thought that my wife 50 female, and I had a pretty good relationship in the beginning. The two of us first met when we were in our early 20s in college. We struck up a friendship first before the two of us slowly started to date about 2 years into our friendship. Being friends with someone first is always a good idea because it's not like you don't know the person to an extent. However, dating someone brings a whole new level to a relationship, but that didn't happen with me and my wife. We shifted from friendship to romance pretty easily. The transition was so easy that it was almost a little scary. From there obviously came marriage. We dated for a few years and then decided it was time to get married. It was a mutual decision that saw us having a medium-sized wedding. Thankfully, both sets of parents were ready to help give some money towards the ceremony. Over the years, we bought a house and started having kids. We had our son followed by a second son 3 years later, and our last child 4 years after our second son. The last child was a girl. My wife was a good mother when they were younger, but once the kids got out of the toddler stage and began to grow into their personalities, she seemed to lose interest. It was like she was only good with them once they were in the baby and toddler stage because they needed her more. This was at least my mindset. It wasn't like she still wasn't a mother to them, but they always went towards me once they were old enough. If they needed something, Dad was the one who was going to do it. While I wasn't happy with it, this was just the way things happened to end up being in our household. By the time we hit our late 40s, our marriage was estranged. The youngest child was starting middle school with the oldest being at college already. Our middle child would be going to college sooner rather than later. So that was another milestone we were getting too soon. I couldn't remember the last time my wife and I even had a date night, let alone were intimate with each other. Still, when we got married, I said for better or worse, I was going to stick it out no matter what. One day I asked my wife if maybe we could consider counseling, but she brushed it off saying it wasn't needed. It was by the time we were reaching the age of 50 that I was starting to get dejected with the whole situation. I wasn't happy, but I still wanted to try to have a genuine relationship with my wife. We had been through so much and had 3 children together. That seemed something worth fighting for. However, my wife had different ideas. Anytime I tried to get us to talk, she would rebuff me. Then I had to sit down and analyze her behavior. I wanted to try to figure out what was going on with her, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure it out. The one to figure out what was going on with my wife was our middle son. He took me aside one day and told me that he had been out running an errand when he saw my wife, his mother, kissing another man just out in the street. We lived in a city and not a small town, but it wasn't that big. There was still the chance of someone seeing them. For example, our literal children. That didn't seem to matter much to my wife. When I got a chance, I confronted her about it, and even went to show her a video my son took when she started to deny it. This was when she got quiet. I asked her if she loved me anymore, and she said she fell out of love with me a long time ago. To say I was devastated was an understatement because I loved her. Even after all we had been through, I still loved her a lot. However, now that she had broken our vows, I saw no reason why I had to stick to them. It was for better or worse until someone stepped out of the marriage. I'm sorry, but there was no coming back from that at all. When it came to the kids, I wanted to tell them all at once that we were getting a divorce. My wife and I got on a group call and told them. They weren't surprised because our middle son had already told his other two siblings that he had found their mother cheating. Sides were picked, and they picked mine. My wife accused me of trying to turn the kids against her, but I reminded her that she did that all on her own. It was her choice to cheat and break up the family, so she had no one to blame but herself. The divorce was a bitter one. It was decided we'd sell the house and each take half. Honestly, I didn't even want it anymore. There were too many memories in the house, most of which I didn't want to remember. Once the divorce was final and the house was sold, I got a condo with my half of the money that was close to my oldest son, who was starting a family of his own with his girlfriend. They weren't pregnant yet, but were trying, and I was very excited. My kids completely cut my now ex-wife off. She was angry, but she had begun pulling away from them ages ago, so I don't know what else she expected. Throw in the fact that she cheated on me, and it was safe to say our kids wouldn't want to be involved with my ex for a long time, if ever. She moved on with the AP as I expected. He was unknown to me, but I guess they had been neighbors when they were younger. Thanks to Facebook, they were able to reconnect before engaging in an affair about a little over a year before we divorced officially. To no one's surprise, the AP ended up cheating on my wife. In response, my wife got drunk, jumped in her car, and attempted to drive to his house, but ended up being caught on the way. The result? She was charged with a DUI. I was shocked at this behavior because she had never done such a thing while we were together. I honestly didn't feel any pity for my ex because she had done it to herself. After all of this she had done to herself. Her parents ended up bailing her out, though she did attempt to ask our children, and even me. We all refused. Calling my ex-in-laws was the last resort because they were very judgmental and would hold it against my ex-wife. She ended up getting off with a slap on the wrist since it was her first offense, but the fact that it happened in general was embarrassing for her. Again, I was done with my ex-wife, so there was no sympathy for her. My ex had chosen her AP over her children, and that was just how it was going to be. When our son and his girlfriend finally did get pregnant and have a child, she attempted to show up at the hospital. I had no idea how she found out, but it was a shock to see her there. In a matter of seconds, she was shooed away and shouted the entire time she was being led out of the hospital. Thankfully, neither our son nor his girlfriend were aware of the encounter, which I was grateful for. Maybe if she seemed genuinely sorry for her behavior, our son would change his mind, but until then, she would not see our grandkid. OP, I do admire you for trying to work on your marriage, even when it seemed like there was no hope. You truly did believe in your vows, because I also believe when you do get married, it's for life. Unless, of course, something happens such as cheating. You did what you had to do, and I'm glad your kids had your back. It's a shame that your son had to see his mother cheating on his father, as well as go on to tell you what had happened. No child should have to tell their parents such a thing. The DUI serves her right. Perhaps she was going through some midlife crisis which caused her to act like this. Or it could have always been there, and it just took a situation like this for it to come to light. Overall, keep doing what you're doing.